Hello, hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome, welcome. We will get started in just about another minute or two as people are making their way in. Most of you are in HR, and so you would assume that HR professionals would be on time and timely, given what we do for a living, but that's not always the case. Because also, HR people, it's summer, and it's talent season in the summer. So I know any of you who are in recruiting or training or HR are likely dealing, this is kind of your tax season within the accounting world, which I totally get. All right, people are making their way in. And there are some familiar faces, or familiar names, I should say. For any of you who haven't, who are trainers, but who have not yes, that is. Yep, Sherry. It's your busy season. Yeah, those of you who haven't given a webinar before, but you might speak a lot in sessions, it is a very strange phenomenon because I can't see any of you. And so it's weird. I'm just speaking into the ethers without seeing if anybody's laughing at a joke, like when I hope you're laughing at a joke, or having that aha moment. So do feel free to use the chat as we're going through. But we are going to get started because we honor those who are on time, without a doubt. But I know we'll have some other folks come in and welcome everyone to this webinar, Building the Advisory Firm of Tomorrow. My name is Danielle McCormick. I'm happy to be with you today. And I want to apologize first to anybody who was registered to attend when this was scheduled 2 weeks ago, and I had to cancel at the last minute. I had a cold and a nasty cough, and that cough, I don't know what it is. It feels like since COVID, coughs are just different than they used to be, and they linger on. Even today, I might still have them, but it was one of those scenarios where I was talking and I was breaking into the ugly cough, and nobody wants to see that. So thank you for your flexibility. Thank you for rescheduling again, especially to all of you learning and HR professionals who I know are slammed during this time of year. Moving things around can be a little bit tricky, but I am really happy to be here with you today to talk about this topic. And a lot of you on the call I have met. It's fun to see some of our clients. Lori, good to see you. Kiva, good to see you, or to know that you're here. Some friends of ours that have been here, but some of you aren't familiar with Spiral by LC Vista. Most of you probably know LC Vista. It's probably the LMS and compliance tool that your firms are using. We work with firms all over the country, and Spiral by LC Vista is a managed service provider. So we come in to give small to mid-sized firms some additional headcount support and strategic L&D support within the market. So we partner with firms all over the country. And in my background, I've been in the profession now since 2013. I'm a total accidental lover of the profession. I worked in luxury hospitality for my life. I was in general trying to avoid HR and the accounting office, usually because I was in trouble with both of those departments. And then somehow I found a career in loving this profession. And I worked within a top 70 firm for many years. And I love how collaborative and not competitive this profession is, how we would just work together to try to solve the same problems. And that ultimately led to me doing some consulting with other firms, and eventually led to me starting Spiral by LC Vista. So that's what we do is we come in and provide learning and development support to firms that are under-resourced, and every firm is under-resourced in people development. And so I spend most of my days anymore talking with managing partners, chief people officers, really looking at where is the firm going and how are we positioning our talent strategies in order to get there. And so that's what I really want to focus on today. We are going to answer questions as we get to the end in the chat. So don't feel like you have to wait till the end. You can put it in, and depending on how we're moving on time, and what random tangents I get excited about. We may answer questions throughout, but definitely I'll make a point to answer them at the end, or I can email you afterwards to answer any of your specific questions. So with that, we are going to go ahead and get started. And so one of the striking elements about our profession is I think of us as a very innovative profession. I think of us as a profession that is constantly looking at technology and innovations and creative ways for us to solve problems. What's also interesting to me is that most of our talent strategies and practices look the same as the last millennium, quite literally. And so we have to be thinking differently. And that's a broad stroke comment. There's certainly pockets and there are certainly firms that are more innovative. But when we think about the impact and the things that are coming on scene really just in the last handful of years with AI, with private equity, with globalization, utilizing global talent, and then really changing client expectations, it sometimes just feels to me like our talent strategies are like these lagging initiatives that we're trying to solve for. And when I'm talking to leaders, what is hard about that is that many of us are feeling a little bit like we're stuck in purgatory, waiting to see what AI and the impact of AI is actually going to be in the profession, right? So are all of these software companies going to fulfill the promises that they're making? Is all prep going away, either because of automation or because of globalization? What's actually going to happen? And so in the meantime, while we're trying to figure out what it is that our talent structure and our teams are going to do, we've been really busy trying to teach people how to use current AI systems and how to use Copilot or how to use ChatGPT. And that's good. I'm not saying that that's not the right thing. But what I would say is that is a short-term means to an end, because what is likely to happen, my prediction is that in a handful of years, really, we're not making decisions to ask an agent or ask a bot to do things for us. The software that we're hiring in order to fulfill client responsibilities is going to do that on our behalf. And so, but there's just a lot of leaders that are just feeling a little bit stuck. It's like the boogeyman. Okay, we know this thing is coming. We know it's going to make an impact, but we don't yet know what that impact is. Big Four, as we know, if you guys read the same articles I do, is making substantial investments. So we know that there's major progress coming, but in the meantime, we're just feeling a little stuck. But every article you read is about advisory, and transformation. And so what I want to do to start is first, let's just make sure that we're using the right language throughout this conversation. And so within the chat, what I would love for you to do is, how does your firm define advisory? You can just add in whatever. There isn't a right or a wrong answer. But I do think this is one of the interesting challenges that exists within the profession, is that we don't necessarily, everything that's not audit or tax is going to be advisory. For some, it's high-level CAS services, right? That's not compliance. So Patty's saying that's not compliance. Looking forward and not in the rear view mirror. Ooh, I like that definition. So it's forward looking, right? So that could be tax planning, I suppose. So BV and transaction advisory. So for some, it's departments. For some, it's your CAS practice. For some, thanks, Craig. Yep, it is just, we're trying to help clients achieve success. It's more of a philosophy in what we're going to do. And then, it's whatever's not defined by another service line. Okay. So all that's really helpful. My definition, as we're thinking about advisory, Amy, it's similar, is thinking about it more in a consultative manner as opposed to a transactional manner. And so when we're talking about advisory and preparing ourselves for this, that's the lens that I'm looking through and that I'm going to be talking about today. So if you're here to learn about how to build a CAS practice, stick around, you might have a good time, but that's not really what we're going to be talking about. It's really about how are we enabling our talent strategies to be thinking about the direction that we're going. So that's what we're going to be up to. So our friends at Boomer Consulting have been sharing this model forever, right? And a lot of you who attend Boomer events, you're familiar with them. We are great friends with the Boomer team as well. So we have the firm of today, or even the firm of yesterday, as well as the firm of the future. And they've been introducing this concept for a long time, right? That the idea currently, while there are certainly some adjustments, and there are some firms that are more progressive within this, we still tend to find that where most people are spending their time still follows this model, right? Doers are in the prepare space, maybe in a review, but any strategy work or advisory work is done at a more senior level. Whereas when we look at the firm of the future, we know that's going to be more of a diamond model while also looking creatively at outsourcing and automation. So you'll have seen this for a while. I think I've seen this model for over 10 years. Yet when I'm still working with firms, they tend to be really stuck in what to do and how to do that. And so if we're already in alignment with the fact that the work has changed or is changing, then why are we still hiring and developing people for yesterday's firm? And what I tend to find in talking to leaders is because we are still stuck in that purgatory spot where we don't necessarily know what the skills are then of the future. And so in the absence of having an answer, we retreat back to what we've always done because, as one of my mentors told me before, like, sometimes partners can't hear the need for change because their ears are stuffed so full of money, right? It's been working for us for a long time, but we also know that something is changing and something is coming. So if I ever would have told you in my early days as a learning and development professional that I would include a screenshot of a spreadsheet in a presentation, I would have fallen out of my seat. But all of you accountants have broken me down, and now I use spreadsheets for everything. So what I want to introduce to you is how us at Spiral, when we're working with firms and we're starting to introduce these concepts, how we approach this, right? And so it starts first with really having a strong understanding of skills. Now, a lot of firms use language like competency frameworks or skills frameworks, and those terms lots of times can be used interchangeably. And one thing that I want us to get really clear on is the value and the importance of us using the language of skills versus competencies. Competency, when you look at this, is a larger category of things that someone needs to know. And when we start getting into changing behaviors and specific roles and responsibilities for advisory, this becomes increasingly important. Because what we know is we can't skip 3 years of development, right? We can't hire people and just assume through osmosis that they're going to understand all of this. They have to be able to consult on something. And so the mandate constantly to all of you in people is we need to develop faster. So I hear 3 years of knowledge within 1, or 5 years within 3, or 8 years within 3. Doesn't really matter. The point is it has to be done faster. Well, we need to make sure that we have a really solid foundation of what do people actually need to know. And so the way that we approach that at Spiral is that we have, we have almost 600 of these that are broken down across tax, audit, CAS, and success skills are the areas that we really specialize within. And we have them in technical as well as several advisory and success skills capabilities. So you can see we've got general levels of experience, a topic, a competency, and then what we call an I can statement. And an I can statement is really where that skill is there. And so when you start thinking about what does someone actually need to know and to be able to grasp, and what do we need to be able to prove, then we also look at assessment questions in order to be able to demonstrate knowledge, right? So any of you who have heard me speak before know that I have a deep passion, not if someone attended training, but did they actually learn? Not did somebody meet their compliance education requirements, but has there actually been a transfer of knowledge? And so we do that also with assessing, both in written assessments. You can also do something like this with in an interview process. But for those of you who are feeling a little bit stuck on, okay, we know this is coming. I know there's going to be a different job description that's going to be coming here within the next 1 to 5 years, depending on how quickly all of this technology is evolving. Getting really, really clear on what skills someone needs to understand at the baseline level is incredibly important. And then really being able to test that knowledge. Right now, it's highly subjective, right? A reviewer says, yep, they're good enough, or they've done enough of these projects. But instead actually being able to assess that. We do the same thing with success skills, and these are some of our advisory competencies and skills that we're really looking for. So when we think about the competency, it's being able to diagnose problems, being able to develop insights, right? So the I can statements here that you can see along the top: clarify clients' problems by gathering information, identifying key issues, and confirming a shared understanding before I propose a solution. So then we're going to have more of a simulation question in this scenario of, here's what's happened, and so how do you demonstrate this? So we use this first to identify the skills, then we map content and courses or build courses to this. It's part of learning plans, and a lot of your firms might build learning plans, but how grounded are they really in these I can statements? You're going to see more and more that we're moving towards skills development and skills language, and this is how you can start to break this down. Hefty project without a doubt, but I would really encourage you to look at this as a foundational step. And so because we haven't yet figured out the job descriptions of the future, it means that recruiting is misguided, right? Recruiting, then we're going to keep recruiting and developing talent the same way we've always done. And so when we think about that college to career, that professional readiness for our more experienced professionals, like what we're usually looking for is their eligibility for CPA. And none of these things are bad. And so know that there's nothing about me that's saying we don't do these things. I just think we need to be doing these things and maybe challenging our thinking a little bit. So CPA eligibility, GPA, right? What technical expertise are we looking for? But there's very different predictors of advisory success. And many of you, I remember this working in the firm, we would have these professionals that would come in, and especially when we were in a really rapid growth trajectory, that were really nice people. Either maybe they were really bubbly and vivacious and really talkative, but the criteria for success was about technical accuracy and competence. And so a lot of leaders just honestly didn't know what to do with them. They just didn't know. And so because they weren't technically perfect, then they weren't a fit within the firm. And what we're seeing now is those people that weren't a fit, actually, maybe we need to be rethinking them, because what actually predicts success in an advisory element, again, they have to have technical competence. I'm not minimizing that, but what level of commercial curiosity do they have? Can they learn, and are they agile? Do they have a level of executive presence? And they can actually talk about what coachability is. Ken, I'm going to talk about commercial curiosity here in a minute. So great question, and we'll dig into that here in a second. And so when we think about recruiting, high-performing firms are going to recruit differently. So they're going to utilize assessments. These are some of the assessments that I recommend. If you have others that you're using that aren't included in the list, put them in the chat for other folks to be able to use. I like assessments differently for candidate selection versus career pathing, right? Those are very different elements. And so love the team at Account Test. I know their BRN members do a great job of really assessing that technical competence to understand what they're up to. But Predictive, Index, PXT, Colby, these are tools that are going to show you a different behavioral framework of who is going to be more naturally positioned to be successful in that advisory mindset. When we start looking then assessments for career pathing, right, that's where utilizing tools like DISC and StrengthsFinder, and I know some firms are now starting to experiment a bit with Working Genius, a Patrick Lencioni tool as well. And so rethinking your internship experiences, right, making sure that we're letting your folks learn the firm's business. I cannot tell you how many managers and senior managers I work with now who do not understand the money-making model of their firms. In our management academy that we do, we have an entire module that is all about thinking as a business owner. And when we consider what these folks went to school for and how they spend their days, the gap in understanding how firms make money and how clients make money is a real gap. And so when you think about your internship experience, just starting with understanding the money-making model of the firm and where we add value, making sure that there's a whole lot more client interaction and advisory conversations, not that they need to contribute a lot as an intern necessarily, but that they have the skills and capabilities and they're not going to pee their pants at the idea of picking up a phone and calling a client, right? You guys hear that all the time, like they won't call a client. They're not going to call a client and want to do that. That's probably an indication they might not be a good fit in this particular trajectory. Making sure that they understand the industries that you serve, right? Many of you are focused on industry specialization or market specialization. Get them deep in the industry, less about accounting, more in what's happening in the business landscape. Ask interns to do a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis on a client in an industry and present recommendations to solve. Get them to start thinking early on about what's going to matter to this client as opposed to the deliverable that was there. I was talking to a managing partner not long ago, and again, this was I don't remember if it was a senior manager or partner. It was a primary relationship person on the tax side of things, and um, and they lost the client. The client actually filed for bankruptcy, and so at that point, obviously, that's a bad thing. And they were talking about it, and the tax leader had said, "Yeah, we saw that they were struggling last year, so we can't say we're totally surprised." Well, you can obviously imagine their response, like, well, why didn't we look into the industry? Why didn't we look into the market? Why didn't we provide additional services in order to help them to get their financial house in order so we didn't get there, right? But it seems like this should be common sense, and it is not, because we can be so focused really within our individual lanes. And then obviously be thoughtful of AI usage throughout, making sure that we're building that fluency. So when you think about recruiting for tomorrow's firm, and I'm going to move to L&D here in a minute, that we used to look at GPA. Now I think we want to be testing for curiosity or looking for that. Instead of just a technical interview, let's engage in some business conversations. Give a candidate a case study to be able to review and ask them to come and see how they show up based on levels of curiosity or recommendations or insights. In addition to a resume, let's also look at the right assessment tools. Instead of just CPA eligibility, what is the potential for advisory? And again, not everybody needs to be an advisor. There certainly is, for most firms, still a career path in technical competence, but so often that's going to be the challenge, right? Is that we still over-index in one area versus the other. Instead of time to productivity, time to client readiness, and again, not just their knowledge, but what can they learn? How agile are they going to be within the learning process? And so much of what we've been doing, right, goes back to that traditional staffing pyramid, where there was this very wide base of early career staff, all of those doers. They do a lot of routine technical work in order to build their competence, and then competence builds confidence, right? And so the way that they build competence, and honestly, many times the way that most leaders then assign confidence in their ability is their technical proficiency, right? And so with repetition and proving accuracy, then we assume that that is going to lead to judgment. But that's one of the things I hear all the time from leaders is we've got managers and senior managers who don't have professional judgment. It goes back to that story that I told you about before, about that tax leader that was so focused in the deliverable, they couldn't pull their head up to say, well, wait a minute, there's some additional elements here we need to be paying attention to. And the other thing that we see is client exposure is earned slowly. And a lot of you are, I fully recognize that a lot of you are experimenting with some things here, right? So it's not black and white. There's usually some elements of gray that firms are experimenting with in some of this. But I think, asking yourself how long it takes for a client or for a younger staff member or a less experienced staff member to interact with a client beyond asking them for something, are they actually contributing to something, is probably a good indication. And oftentimes we're so afraid that they're not going to know the answer that we don't put enough effort into helping them to ask really good questions. So we'll get into some of that. So again, when we think about the old first skills and the way that we've traditionally developed people within that model, it was all about technical accuracy first, right? Just think about your orientation and onboarding process. It's all about technology, right? And getting ready in order to be productive. We need them to be productive as quickly as possible. So often that prep or briefing for engagements in the first couple of years is same as last year. If there's a volume of similar work in order to build that competence, and then gradual responsibility is going to gain. And what I want to bring to you or challenge you with a little bit as we're thinking about the new first skills that we should be introducing much earlier is this idea of business acumen and commercial awareness. To understand business, to understand how to prepare an audit financial statement, um, bookkeeping or a tax return, but really to be able to have much more knowledge. Um, Critical thinking and context, making sure that there's an understanding of the why behind what we're up to, judgment, and then, oh my gosh, communication. I mean, I can just imagine me saying how many of your folks like won't call a client. They've emailed them 20 times and it's like they won't get back to me. It's weird. What else could you do to get them to get back to you? And so let's talk about what do I mean by these things, right? To answer the question, when I talk about commercial awareness, understanding one, how does the firm make money, which I touched on. Also, how does the client make money? What is the velocity? What is the money making model? If they're a not for profit, what factors are going to be really critical to their success, right? So, really understanding that, especially within industries and markets where a lot of it is very similar, this should be a critical part of education. Understanding what actually drives client value. And so, what do the clients care about? And then also being able to identify where will advisory opportunities live with this specific client or within traditionally with these types of clients, right? When we cluster them together. And so training now and development must include business fluency. I mean, I commented on it earlier of how many leaders are really stuck here. And the longer it takes to be able to learn this, the harder it is. And so you can do this by having folks, even interns, attending industry conferences where your clients are going. You know, your marketing and sales folks are going there to try to generate business. Go have them listen into some of the sessions that are being presented at these industry conferences to hear about what matters. Even if you just have them review an agenda from a conference, and so it's too cost prohibitive or time prohibitive for you to be able to send them, making sure, have them do a general assessment of what are the themes that are going to matter most at an industry conference that your clients in this area are going to be able to attend. They will learn so much about what's going to matter and what story and questions then could be developed as a result of that. So context before compliance. So again, so often success is just the deliverable on time, on budget, and with a high degree of accuracy. But why does this matter? And especially for our compliance tools, what risk is being mitigated as a result of this? Having a greater connection to that work is going to be able to allow them to tell that story. And just asking these questions, having your staff members be able to recite this to you in their own words is incredibly powerful. And then really understanding, what do we do with this information? What business decision is this actually going to support? When I was at the old firm I was at, which is now called Pinion. Some of you might be familiar with that firm. When I joined them, they were called Kennedy & Co., and then they were Keiko Isom, and now they're Pinion, as the naming story tends to go within our profession. And while I was there, I was a coach. And so I was working as a talent advisor with staff. And I was hearing from them how many opportunities they wanted, that they were kind of bored by doing a lot of this traditional prep work. And at the same time, I'm hearing all of these senior leaders talk about how they wanted to see more curiosity and interest in ingenuity and initiative in order to step into more meaningful experience. So clearly I knew there was a gap there, right? That they're not talking to each other. And so I created a program at that firm that was called BAM, BAM, and we just liked saying BAM because it was, Emeril Lagasse. It was a long time ago. You got to give me a little credit. But BAM stood for Business Advisor Mentorship Program. And so we had high-performing individuals that we would match up then with leaders who demonstrated this. And one of the modules that we went through within this program was, okay, a financial statement or an audit, beyond you giving it to them and it going and sitting on a shelf or sitting in a file that they never open, how is that an advisory tool? How can you look at this and see what questions we might want to ask about their business as a result of what we're seeing here? Same thing with the tax return. I worked with a fantastic partner. Her name was Jill Eberhardt. She retired several years ago. That for every single new staff prepared that she worked with, when they would turn in a deliverable to her, she asked them to include 3 questions that they have about a client based on what they saw within that deliverable. Like she was doing this before it was even a thing. And you think about just imparting that kind of knowledge that right off the bat, that winning isn't getting it done, but winning is understanding what I want to learn about this. Man, that's a different kind of conversation. So you're shifting from completion really to business understanding. And then judgment before repetition, right? So we know repetition matters, but also getting them to be able to identify what looks unusual. Many of your folks have said that, right? They get a deliverable and they're like, how did this even come to me that they didn't ask? Gosh, this doesn't make sense, even in comparison to last year. What questions should be asked? What do we need to escalate? And so you want to start teaching pattern recognition very early without necessarily needing that volume. So they don't need to have prepared 100 of them. They can be able to identify the same pattern recognition by doing 10 engagements or 10 deliverables. It totally changes how we set that up. Then we get into communication before perfection, right? So getting people comfortable communicating with clients quickly. Teaching the ability to explain findings clearly. And so when I say explain findings clearly, right? Like one of my favorite things about my relationship with chat, I don't know if you all name your AI. Mine's Chaz. That'd be fun. You can put your names of if you name your chat. I name my GPS in the car Betty because I yell at her sometimes. So it makes it a little more human, whatever. But anyway, the point of that is that one of the things I love that chat does for me is I can put complex information and say, explain this to me like an 11-year-old. Explain this to me like a person who has no knowledge about that. And the ability to then communicate in a way that is actually meaningful is a gift, right? And you've seen folks in your firm who do it really well and those who get incredibly lost because it's like we're able to charge the client by the word as opposed to the meaning of it. And so starting to teach how to communicate in simple ways early on, asking better questions. So much of the power of a fantastic advisory mindset as you're building that culture in a firm is enabling people to ask questions and teaching them how to ask questions. And I will tell you, as leaders in this profession, we freaking suck at this because so often we're nervous to ask questions we don't already know the answer to. We so much of a partner's reputation and confidence is based on knowing the answer as opposed to connecting the client to the person who has the answer. And so that's a little bit of a that's probably its own separate webinar that we could potentially offer. But I think that knowing early on that you can start asking those questions, and for those of you who have advisory practices within your firm, you can ask them to generate those questions for you even, right? What are the top 5 questions I should be asking in order to demonstrate curiosity about a firm's business, right? Or about a client's business? Something that isn't stupid, right? That actually is a stupid question because we know there is such thing as a stupid question. But what are key themes that are going on? You have an HR consulting practice, they know what's happening with labor. You've got something with BV and what's going on in the M&A world, they're going to be able to know what questions to ask. Understanding how to escalate with context, right? So how do they bring you or a more senior person into the conversation at the right time? And active participation in client conversations. And so, I think early on, even being able to do a report out on one section of a return or a deliverable, just to be able to practice that, even for interns to be able to do it. I mean, you've got a grown up there, right? They're not going to say anything that's wrong, but just learning these skills. And I'm telling you, especially with these college to career folks who are so nervous naturally talking to folks, the faster you get them doing this and the faster you get them comfortable with being uncomfortable, the better off you're going to be. And so it's no longer you're smart enough, wise enough, perfect enough to be able to communicate with a client. It's just that you need to be clear enough with a client in whatever it is you're asking or delivering, that is what's ultimately going to be providing value. All right, so I'm going to give you guys just a second. We're about halfway through, and I want you to just think a little bit about your own firms, right? And I want you to think about your first year of onboarding. And I'd love for you to just answer in the chat, like what's happening within your firms that maybe are you doing something different? So for some of you, when you answer the question, what are staff actually doing? It could be same old, and Sally. That's why I'm here, Danielle. I need some guidance. Others of you, though, might be doing something a little different. And I'd love for you to put into the chat what you're doing. Same thing, maybe some of your firms are in fact building some of those new first skills. You might call them something different, right? You might have a different theme, but I would also love to share some knowledge and see what other people are doing. And also, where are we still training for a model that no longer exists? Like how many of you are looking at this? Yeah, Joseph, too much compliance training, need additional soft skills and advisory training. So Joseph, you hit the money word that anybody who knows me, I charge people for calling them soft skills. So I want to encourage you to change that language to success skills, power skills, relationship skills, anything other than soft, right? Because we know, and that's why firms hire us all the time. They say we do a ton of technical training. What we need is we got to get people to talk to people. It's all of these other things. So I'm winking at you a little bit, but if you come to a session again and say soft skills, I'm going to charge you a quarter. Yeah, so how to train for these skills, just on the job, real life examples. So I think, Sarah, I think you might be asking me for examples on how to do that. So there's certainly classroom elements to be able to do it, but it is all about role play and conversation in the most simple way. Let's walk through a client scenario. Like I said before, that SWOT analysis is a great one. You can go do this on your own, do a little bit of a presentation. Let's walk through what you're seeing and what you're observing. That can be done in a 20-minute conversation. It can be done over lunch. It can be done over a brief Zoom call. It can be done on the way to the client. Any of those are going to be simple ways. So often it doesn't need to be this big organized event, which of course I'm a fan of too, of those client conversations, but so much of it is really starting to have conversations with your mentors that are actually influencing and interacting with these clients, and getting them to ask different questions of your preparers and reviewers of what's going to matter, I think is huge. Okay. Any other contributions into the chat on any of these? It tells me a lot of folks are still doing the same old thing. And I get it, it's hard. And sometimes the hard part is you convincing upward that a change needs to happen. Remember, your stuff's so full of money, they can't hear the need that we need to change it, because a lot of the more influential people didn't learn this way and they figured out how to become advisors, right? It just took them 30 years in order to get there. That's the hard part. It is all about, it's all about speed. Yeah. Relationship skills are more difficult to train. Recognizing who has natural ability and refining is the hard part. Yeah, I would agree, especially because they're also bright and shiny in the interview process, and so assessments can help, but post-hire assessments, I think, can really do of who's naturally able to do it, can really help. I think the other thing is, whether it's a program like BAM that I mentioned before, and I know some of you don't have the resources internally to be able to build that, or if it's even, or if it's just something in that's more simple, right? Just the intentionality. People will raise their hand and say, "I want that. That looks fun." Because what's funny is when we interview them, they all say they want client management, client exposure, client engagement, want to make a difference, right? I mean, it's not like we interview people and they're like, I want to sit in a room and do a 10 key. Some do, but in general, most want to have that client impact. Yeah, Sarah, accountants are by nature more introverted, but I would challenge that. Are accountants more introverted, or are the accountants we hire more introverted because we are over favoring or over indexing some things? I think you're probably right that in general, it's not like, I'm not an introvert and I certainly wasn't gravitating toward accounting. And so that's not certainly enough data to be able to make that decision. But I think sometimes it's us thinking about it a little bit differently. And like I said before, with folks on the DISC spectrum, or the DISC dimensions, for those of you who use DISC, eyes, over the last few years have struggled a bit to find their path because they're a little bit different. Maybe we need to be thinking about those eyes and S's just a little bit different. Okay, so what I want to introduce to you is a new development model before I open it up for some just general Q&A on this topic or anything else. So I'm not saying this is the development model, but is one that you can look at for new staff. As you start thinking about, okay, what can I do now while I'm waiting for the AI magic and these magic software solutions, and I'm waiting for the new job description? How can I start developing this while I also need to be developing the rest, right? So, I think that so often it's understanding that it used to be repetition, right? Repetition built confidence before. So what is going to build it now? I really do think that it's a matter of thinking about development in an exciting and very, very different way. So it used to be, repetition, accuracy, judgment. Now, what I want to introduce to you is just really this concept of exposure, participation, and ownership. So thinking about that development timeline a little bit differently, and really what people are going to have exposure to. And so I'm going to break this down in roughly 3 stages. You could adjust this timetable as you need to, but I think we should challenge ourselves to move faster. If you're already experimenting with global talent, some of you have already seen how this has gone, right? Like, so how equipped are we when we think about our systems? What's the work quality? How well are we communicating expectations? And then again, what are we doing with our domestic talent? If we're utilizing global talent, all of a sudden, a lot of us have been wrestling with that for a minute. And so when we think about stage 1, right, I think first it's this exposure. So really the immersion in a business model, the firm's business model, the client's business model. So again, going back to that idea of commercial awareness, really focusing on shadowing client conversations a lot, not just I sat in and listened to a phone call or I read a transcript, but being there and watching how your people who are fantastic at this work through this, the masters who do it. There's just so much value in that. Guided interpretation sessions. I know that sounds super woo-woo, like it's an interpretive dance or it's an interpretive meditation, nothing like that. But really that's where one of the questions that was asked earlier was, what I mean by that is giving a scenario, giving a client SWOT analysis, giving a case study, right? That is a real life example. We're struggling with how to solve this for this client. I mean, that's where I learned so much about this profession. I mean, when I first started, hand to God, I had to Google attest. Like, I didn't even know how to spell attest. When I was working in an accounting firm. And I was lucky enough to work for a firm just to say, we're going to go brainstorm this really complex client deal. You just want to sit in and listen. I mean, I was just able to pick up all of this. And so just guiding through Q&A as they watch is incredibly valuable. Same thing, structured why behind the work debrief. So after a client meeting, after a client deliverable, then really digging into why this matters and having that newer staff member be able to communicate the impact of that. And then, of course, there's traditional project prep. I'm not saying that needs to go away, but I don't know that they need to do as much as we're currently having people do in order to feel like they've really grasped the material. And so what I really want you to think about in this first phase is replacing pure task execution with contextual learning, right? So how do we weave this into our on-the-job training experience? And so then the second stage is really in this participation stage. And I think for a lot of firms, that could be 6 to 18 months, roughly, where they're drafting insights, not just schedules, right? So they're not preparing, but really what can they learn and communicate that matters. Oh, Ken, I love this question about realization. You hold your horses on that because I'm going to talk about that. Like, okay, this is great, Danielle. What are they doing in order to pay for themselves? I'll come to that, I promise. Participating in client calls, right? Making sure that, again, they have a job, some cross-functional exposure. Different firms are really looking at this differently, right? There's some firms that want to have lots of exposure into different functional areas, whereas others, you are going to go deep in one area. I'm a huge believer in really expanding that even to your advisory practices within their first session. I think less looking at things like healthcare and a residency model, and understanding that if we want to build up some of these skills and to understand what they want to do before they actually choose is a much smarter, longer, more expensive, but smarter long-term way to be able to get folks connected. AI-enabled data interpretation. I have mixed opinions about this particular one because, yes, I think AI is a tool. I also can speak personally. A lot of you can too. AI does make me a little lazy and a little bit dumber. And so us making sure that we're clear on understanding the tool of AI. It's not thinking for you, but it's helping to organize your thoughts. I just think is critical, especially in these early stages. And then, of course, presentation skill development. Just getting young professionals in front of people, comfortable talking in front of people. So they're not still watching the big kids do stuff, but instead really actively participating. And then stage 3, which is what I would consider really ownership, right? So when we start thinking about probably year 2+, right, they're going to be managing distributed workflows between AI, globalization, multiple team members. They're reviewing work. They're going to be engaging. If you guys are training agents on your behalf to do some of this work, right, they are ready to be able to take on all of the different inputs of where work is coming from. And then they should really be ready to explain results to clients. And so they're reviewing it, but more importantly, at this point, at 2 years, I want you to think about your typical 2-year person, 2 to 3 year person on the readiness. This is what I think we need to be challenging ourselves to be building. That's what we're committed to building at with the team at Spiral. Helping them to identify risks and opportunities. And then I would also say early business development exposure. I haven't touched very much on BD and growth conversations. And, nobody answered that in the chat, but lots of times I hear that advisory is really about selling services, cross-selling services. And I think in some firms that's the case. And I think that can be a good thing. I think that the point of the folks that I look at that are the best at this, they just have that ability. It's like they sit down in front of a client and they hear what the client is experiencing. And it's like they have bells that ding in their head of the 10 ways that we can help to solve and satisfy that problem. And they also have 10 faces that pop up in their head of who they need to meet. I think that is what we want to start introducing, is this concept of business development is a good thing, not a bad thing, because we are actually solving problems. We're just going to provide an introduction to the expert and really let them to be able to take that on. And so really what we want to be doing in this third stage of ownership is accelerating client readiness so that they actually can take on a client manager responsibility. They have enough expertise to be able to advise and guide, but also they understand the value of what they can do and the evolving needs of the profession. So before I wrap up with some final thoughts and then do a Q&A. So Ken asked the question, what's the expected effect on realization? And this is one of the biggest challenges that we have, right? So again, when our model of success for development is primarily based on productivity over the first couple of years, as opposed to looking at it into an investment time frame, you're perfectly aligned to get the results that you're currently getting. And so what I'm trying to bring to firms is to look at it very differently and to not have, again, not that they're not productive, that's not the case, but if that's the production engine that's ultimately fueling your gross margin, but we also think then that we know that these advisory services are much more profitable for us in the future, then we probably need to invest a little bit more in non-chargeable work and development time earlier on. And so different firms have different things. Sometimes they'll have codes to charge it to where their ultimate realization, it doesn't necessarily count against this. And so it might be L&D time or development time, or I think those that are smart are doing that in order to evaluate that, because then they can also look at an ROI on, and did it work? We thought it would work. Did it work? And if it didn't work, is that because we didn't have the right mentors? Is that we didn't have the right classroom training? Is it because we expected too much too soon? I think the more clean data you have to be able to assess the effectiveness of this is important. But a huge part of this is we have to think differently. That this can't be the cheap labor that we're utilizing, and ultimately in order to fund other things. It's a totally different investment structure. Okay, so final thoughts before I do some Q&A. So don't get overwhelmed by all the unknowns. I think that's what I see most is people are like, I don't know where to start, Danielle. Like, just focus on the next 12 to 18 months. What is in front of you that you can be doing now? Right now, many of you are planning for your next intern cycle, your next college to career cycle, what's happening with your fall and spring hires, right? Focus in just a little bit, and you can start small. You could do it in a pilot group. You can do it in an office. You could do it in an industry. Skills frameworks set your foundation. I mean, they are huge to be able to walk through that process and to be able to understand, what do we actually need people to do? What are we no longer going to need those people to do? Advisory isn't a service line. I know it is a service line. I should probably change that to advisory isn't only a service line. If you really want to change the perspective and what we're seeing with this transformative element that's coming in the next few years, we need to recognize that. Technical skills still matter, but they're not the full story. And being able to introduce that as quickly as possible. And just, like I said before, just really start small, like improve one process this year in recruiting and L&D. If you just do that, if you just do one thing, you're ahead of most other firms, because you've gotten out of the waiting, and instead you've actually moved forward. Yes, Jared, getting comfortable with value billing versus billing by the hour is a huge element when it comes to the success of this. I think so many firms are really struggling with how to do that. So, okay, I want to open it up to questions. Also put my contact information up. And yes, these slides will be sent out afterwards. If we are not connected on LinkedIn, I would love for us to get connected on LinkedIn. This is one of the topics I'm most excited about talking about, and I'm doing a fair amount of writing on the subject as well. So if you're curious about this and you want to make sure you can keep learning more, let's get connected so you can read some of those articles or the interviews that we're going to be doing. But beyond that, let's look at what questions might be coming through. I'm going to do a quick scroll to make sure I haven't missed any questions that came in. But feel free to add anything new. There's just, it's an emerging topic, right? And that's where, I get so annoyed in the AI generated articles that are just this fluffy, AI is coming, think differently, transform, be bold, think differently. I'm like, okay, can you give me like one tactical thing that I could actually bring back? And the good news is I do think there are some changes that are happening there, to where now we are experimenting a little bit. We're coming out of this ideation phase and into practical application phase. And, because we are the L&D department for so many firms, we get to experiment a little bit differently and pilot with our clients on different ways to be able to approach this. And so you can watch us as we stub our toe and also have some great success. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I would say if there's no additional questions, thank you so much. But I'll stay on board in case there's any others that come through. Okay. Which assessments do you recommend for new hires to determine best fits in early years? PI, for example, which we use, is not great for younger people. Interesting. And so what I wonder or Katie, can you, I wish you could unmute. Can you share a little more about why it's not good for younger people? Because part of it is I wonder if it's the model that you've created for younger folks. Like one of the things I've seen for younger folks is they're not confident enough in themselves that they answer for what they think the answer is, should be, as opposed to what it is. So if it's that, you could just be like, amen, sister. Are not yet set in their profile. Yeah. And so it's that kind of behavior. I don't know. PI, I mean, I've worked with PI and they know their stuff for sure. I might risk that a little bit. One of the other ones that I like is a tool called Kolbe, Kolbe. And some of your firms use Kolbe. What I really like about Kolbe is what they are assessing is when someone is striving at their best, what behavioral elements are really critical. So there's essentially 4 different modes that they're looking at. One is called fact finder. So how curious are they? How much information do they need before they can move forward and make a decision? Follow through, which is, how are they going to follow through in the details of elements? Quick start. So how quickly can they change? Can they move and adapt? And then what they call implementation, which is, do they work better in the hypothetical or theoretical versus the tangible. So my husband's a golf course superintendent. So he works, with physical things. So for him, he has a very long yellow line in that implementer phase, whereas I have short because I can kind of live in dreamland about it. And so what I would say is, and what I love about this tool is that it's not assessing right or wrong. So you're not looking for a score. But there are some themes and trends, right? So chances are you need someone who's going to be a little bit more successful in a quick start environment. So it's the combination of behaviors that make it so interesting. One of them by themselves isn't bad, but that combination is really good. So Kolbe, Kolbe, is one that I love for starting to assess some of these themes and behavioral patterns. I think DISC is too simple. I just think I don't think that because you're an I, it makes you a great advisor. I think it might make you a good salesperson. It might make you a fun person to hang out with on the weekend. I don't know that that's predictive enough. So digging in a little bit deeper is what I tend to like. To recommend any recruiting tools that can be used to approach candidates differently other than a test. I mean, there's an efficiency element that's hard, right? I mean, all of you are it's a volume game. And so that's why I like testing and behavioral based interviews I think that's a great tool to be able to use. And even you can walk through, this is a great use case for AI of asking for behavioral based interview questions based on the attributes or those I can or skills that you want someone to demonstrate. I think that's a great use case for that to be able to experiment with. I think that's where internships are fantastic if you're a firm who really benefits highly, and that's a huge part of your success and conversion rate, because then you can really see them in a scenario over a longer period of time. Or you can also do simulations within interviews, and so lengthen the process a bit. It's just a matter of how much time and energy you're willing to put in, and maybe that's okay for you to do with an experienced hire more than a college to career, right? Where you're really looking to assess those capabilities. Okay. All right. I didn't see any others come in. Gosh, great to be with you today. Again, thank you everyone for your flexibility in changing what I wanted. Oh, good. I'm glad it was worth the hour. I'm so glad. Money back guarantee on a webinar with me is typically what I'm going to go with. But hopefully I connect with you all on LinkedIn and I see you at a conference or an event sometime soon. Stay in touch and stay cool, everybody. Take care.